Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the November Lunch and Learn for the Warren County Historical Society and its Harmon Museum. My name is John Zimkus. I am the Education Director and Historian here, and it's so nice to see a good crowd with us today. We have a lot of things. This is our little commercial as to what's going on in the future. Next month for the Lunch and Learn, which will be on December 15th, our good friend Fred Compton will be here. As you may know, Fred had worked for over 30 years at the Golden Lamb, started out as a busboy, as a summer job, and didn't leave for 30 plus years after that. He will talk about the 12 months of Christmas and how preparing for the Golden Lamb back 30 years ago took quite a while, and they prepared almost a year ahead of time. And you'll find out how, as he put it, truth in advertising almost destroyed the Golden Lamb at one time, that there was a great light bulb shortage of the early 90s, and why it's never a good idea to have edible decorations. And I'm sure quite a few other things. Fred, like I said, has been part of the Lunch and Learn program for about 10 years now, and we always enjoy, and he always brings a good crowd. On January 19th, we'll have author Carol Tennyson here and talking about her postcard mysteries. She is a local author. She has written several books, often with a Warren County, Lebanon connection. There is her See No Evil. Now, if you, I don't know how well you can see this, but that is a postcard of the old Shaker Shaker Inn Motel, about a quarter of a mile down 42 from where we are right now. So she has real things taking place, but she has a mystery involved. And sometimes if you've been here for a long time, you might recognize a few names being used in her novels. There is also Hear No Evil, which also has a Warren County connection. And our latest one, I believe it is Speak No Evil. The one I personally like is the one I actually helped do some research for, and that is The Westerner. It involves the granddaughter of Thomas Corwin, the famous governor from Ohio, who is buried here in Lebanon. He is the nephew of one of Lebanon's founders, Ichabod Corwin, and it's about their marriage, how he was, James Madison Byrne, her husband, was a recipient of the Medal of Honor for his bravery during the Civil War, and how he was stationed out west and was the assistant quartermaster for Custer at Fort Abraham Lincoln. And that all part of it is true, but inside of that, there's also a mystery involved with that. So she will be here, as I mentioned, on January 19th. On February 16th, I will have the privilege of being your speaker. I'm going to be talking about something I've been researching for about a year and a half now, and it's Lebanon's African Union School, the black school here in Warren County. In the late 1840s, the Ohio General Assembly decided that there should be separate schools for African American students and for white students. And it'll be the beginning of that school, and especially its first African American teacher, Samuel R. Bailey, and the fascinating story of his life. He had his biography put in the 1882 History of Warren County, Beer's History, but he left out a lot of details. Born in Alabama in 1847, in 1863, he leaves and goes to Ohio. Doesn't mention in the biography, which he wrote, that it's the middle of the Civil War and he's a former slave. He goes to Wilberforce University and he studies for 7 years. Doesn't mention the fact that he probably couldn't read, since it was illegal to teach a black man to read in Alabama. And all the other fascinating things about his life, how he changed education here for hundreds of young African American people, and also their parents, and how he went on to Kansas City and left his mark there. On March 16th, we're going to learn about Harmon Blennerhassett. Blennerhassett Island in the middle of the Ohio River, south of Marietta, was one of the most fascinating places to visit in the early years of Ohio, the early 19th century. Well-to-do Irishman. How he became involved with Aaron Burr, the vice president, we all know him from Hamilton now, the man who killed Alexander Hamilton, and how Burr had a plan to perhaps start his own country in the Louisiana Purchase. And how Blennerhassett became part of that, and whatever happened to Blennerhassett Island, and if you went there today, what would you see? So it should be fascinating. Mary Allen will be our speaker. She is one of our great volunteers and our Shaker curator, and she is in the table back there. And we're looking forward to that one. That would be on March 16th. On April 13th, we're not going to have it, the Lunch and Learn, on the third Wednesday. We're going to have it on the second Wednesday because of Easter week. And it'll be the devastating crash of a B-50 bomber here in Warren County, about 4 or 5 miles from where we are right now. This bomber, did it really have a nuclear weapon on board? Some people say yes. We'll hear about it. Our speaker is Sally Sherman Caudill from the Mason Historical Society. She has spoke about this in many different groups, and it's a fascinating story. She's also been in contact with some of the members of the family of the people who were lost in that disaster. What did it do to Warren County? Why did the Air Force come back year after year after year to check where it crashed? A lot of fascinating things about that. So we have a lot of neat things taking place as far as Lunch and Learn. Starting the first weekend in December, we're going to have Timeless Traditions, a Glendower Christmas. The Glendower Mansion, built in 1845, owned by the Warren County Historical Society, will once again be open for Christmas. We will have a Christmas from the mid to late 19th century, decorated as it would have been in that time period. It will be on Fridays and Saturdays from 12 until 4. Prices are $10 for adults, $8 for seniors, and $4 for students. It will not be open the Christmas weekend or New Year's weekend, but it will be opened on the first full weekend of New Year in January. So come take a look at that. Our annual dinner for the Historical Society is coming up, and we invite you to be part of that if you are part of the Historical Society. And I seem to have lost, there's my cheat sheet. The dinner will be on January 20th. It'll be only $25 for individuals, $45 for couples. We're going to have a menu of greens and mashed potatoes and grilled salmon or chicken Parisienne. And it'll also help dedicate some new things we have going on in the Historical Society and keep you abreast as to what is happening in the Historical Society, if in fact you are a member. And we encourage you to become a member. Starting on December 10th, our gallery in the Simondinger Art Gallery will have Tim Ryan from Yellow Springs, Colors and Rhythms in Nature. He is a watercolorist and also an artist in textile, and we will have his work. The Gary Simondinger display, A Life of Art, and will end on December 3rd. If you haven't seen that, take a look at it today while you are here. It is beautiful. It is some of the finest art I have seen in our museum. If they would ever make prints of some of those things, I'd buy some up in a flash. They are absolutely beautiful. Gary was a teacher here for a number of years, died tragically some 15, 16 years ago in a motorcycle accident. He was the art teacher of my son, and my son revered him. And a fantastic artist, and you'll enjoy his style, his creativity, not only his paintings, but also some beautiful pottery. You won't believe the pottery when you see up there. And you probably have seen his work, but never known it was his. As you go down into the Harmon Museum and you look at that mural in the transportation, in the Ron Mag transportation room, you will see that beautiful mural he did about 40 years ago. It's the history of Warren County on the large wall there, and that is also something you will enjoy. Coming in January, our gift shop, which has recently been remodeled, will have some new artisans. So we're going to have quite a few local artists sell their wares in our gift shop. So look forward to that. In the meantime, there is a 10% discount for you of everything in the gift shop. Take advantage of that for stocking stuffers or other presents for the holidays and Christmas, and I think you won't go wrong. Our speaker today is Mary Draper Ingalls. Has nothing to do with Laura Ingalls in Little House on the Prairie. And if you pay attention, the Ingalls is actually spelled differently. I must say before we begin, I have to thank Joyce Lovins-Browning once again for helping arrange that Mary Draper Ingalls was here. She, in the past, has brought Mary Cunningham, the grave robber, who helped so many young medical students learn about anatomy in Cincinnati. And she also helped bring Annie Oakley here. And I understand that she's also been in contact with Julia Dent Grant and Martha Custis Washington. So hopefully Joyce can help bring those people to us in the future. Joyce has worked for 20 years as a naturalist coordinator for the Great Parks of Hamilton County, and she has been forming living history for over 20 years now. Mary Draper Ingalls is the ultimate survivor. She will take you back to 1755, how she was having enjoying life in the pioneer Virginia, and how a raid of Shawnees changed everything for her family. And well over 1,000 miles of being taken away and then coming back to what she considered civilization. Ladies and gentlemen, Mary Draper Ingalls.
My, what a nice crowd we have today. You all look like you're ready for an adventure, am I right? Yes. Well, you've come to a right place because you find yourself now at Ingalls Ferry. And my family has used this property and operated this ferry for quite some time now. So I bet you are going to the Ohio country, am I right? Yes, beautiful country that is. I've been there, you know. So you're probably looking around saying, what does that old lady know about the Ohio country? She probably hasn't been more than 5 miles from the place where she was born. But you're wrong about that. For you see, I've been there. And actually, I was born in Philadelphia. So here in Virginia, where we are now, I'm quite far from where I was born. But the Ohio country, I did not quite go there of my own accord. And since you're waiting for your traveling, we got time to visit. And I'll tell you a little story. For you see, it was the summer of 1755. It was a very hot July day. I was just a sprig of a girl then. I was 23 years old. My husband, William, we had 2 boys. Tommy was 4, and Georgie was 2. And I was pretty close to delivering our 3rd wee child. And you know, I was so hoping for a girl this time. When you have 2 boys, 2 rowdy little boys, you need a girl in there to calm them down a little bit. So that was my hope. And as I woke up one morning, I had this foreboding feeling. You know, you get that sometimes when you think that something's not quite right. William and my brother John were getting ready to go down and do the harvest in the field. And I told William about that because I was up a long time before him. And I told him I just had this feeling that he shouldn't go. And of course he just brushed it off like, Mary, it's the baby. You've went through 2 birthings already, you'll be fine. And you know I'll come a-running if I'm needed. I tried to tell him that no, that's not what I was feeling, but as a man, he did not consider it. So he and my brother John went off to the fields. He did not take his gun, as I urged him to do. He said, we haven't had any trouble or animals around for a while either. It's just more weight that I have to worry about. So I tried to busy myself. I tried to make sure that I kept busy and didn't worry about anything. I sent my mother and the boys to the berry patch because I wanted some berries for a pie. And of course, I had to send my mother because I knew that my boys would probably come back with more on their fingers and in their mouths and tummies than in their bucket. So I was counting on me mother, Eleanor, to bring back enough berries for me, a pie. And she would be telling them stories of Ireland, no doubt, because see, that's where they came from. My mother and my father and my brother John came from Ireland. I was born here in Philadelphia. So she would be telling them that same story. She would have them imagine that the fields and the meadows and the mountains were ocean. And she'd say, look over there, and times that times 10. And then times it times 10, and times 10 again. And that is when you're going to come across a nice green patch of land called Ireland. She loved to tell them stories, and of course they loved to listen. So that day, I knew my sister-in-law, Betty, John's wife, was going to be doing the laundry. They had a new baby boy, and she was going to be down there. So I figured I would be taking my laundry down too. And it was so hot that day. And of course, I didn't have that much laundry to do, but like I said, I needed to keep busy. So I walked on out of the cabin. And as I did, I noticed William's gun was still above the fireplace where he always kept it. And as I stepped out onto the porch, Betty was there. Mr. Barger was coming across the field. And it's at that moment, I don't know if you ever have it, where you realize that your entire life is changing. The commotion, it was almost as if I was watching it from another place. The commotion of the whooping Indians coming out of the woods, and Betty picking up the baby and screaming across the meadow as she carried it. And the gunshot that broke her arm, and she dropped the babe. At that moment, I saw 2 braves pick him up and toss him around as if he was a toy. That is when I tried to do something. I went back in and I grabbed William's gun, only to find it was not loaded. And it was at that point where I found myself being restrained and pulled down. And you know, when you're carrying the burden of a child that you're nearly due to deliver, you can't get up very well. It was the screaming of my own boys being led out of the berry patch by another brave that brought me to my senses. And it was at that horrifying moment that I saw Betty's baby being brained against the side of the cabin. Everything just kind of stood still at that point. It was like it was a surreal thing that was not happening. I felt that we were all going to be put to the hatchet too. And that is when a ringing, authoritative voice called out, and I was spared. I can only imagine that he was the leader of the party, and I was soon to find out that yes, he was. So our cabin was looted. They had other scalps. Braves were coming in from all over. My boys, of course, as tiny as they were crying beyond belief. But I did not see my mother. I didn't see her, and unfortunately, I was hoping beyond hope that she got away, but I knew she would not leave my boys. So if the boys were here, my mother might not be coming back. It was after that they gathered us up, and of course, we were on the march. After they burned our cabin, they put me upon a horse. They put me up there with Georgie, probably knowing that I could not walk very much. And Georgie, of course, was crying. And then Betty was put upon a horse with Tommy. And I told him, and it was something that I remember learning from my father years ago, if you ever find yourself in the situation with Braves, don't show panic, don't show fear. They respect strength. So I shouted to my boys that they had to stop their crying or I was going to take a switch to them. And of course, with the authoritative voice that I was using, they knew for a fact that they had to stay still and be good boys. They were good boys. Betty, of course, was injured and sobbing, of course, uncontrollably for the loss of her own son. And as we were being let out, I saw Mr. Leonard also being let out too. He had a noose around his neck and his hands tied behind his back. And they burdened him down as if he was a mule. They took us through the woods. They took us all through, down through the water. And that's when they put us in canoes. I tried to look behind me. I tried to remember some of the landmarks because I wanted to be sure that as soon as I could escape with my boys, that I was going to find my way home. We had to travel for many days, and what seemed like endless days, but it really wasn't. It was only 3 short days after the event that my child decided that it was going to make its appearance in the world. It was hot. We were in the forest. There was mosquitoes all around. And I knew that I had to show strength at that moment. And for you ladies that have had children, you know that's pretty hard to do. Betty, bless her heart, tried to help me the best she could with just one arm. And lo and behold, my daughter was born. The girl I had wished for came into the world. Poor little thing. I put her inside my dress just to keep the mosquitoes off of her. Named her Betty Eleanor, after my mother and my sister-in-law. And I had a sadness in my heart that William did not see her. So after that, the very next morning, I knew I could not be lagging behind. I could not slow them up. So I had, in fact, had to make myself get up that morning and bring the baby with me. If I could show that I could keep moving, then nothing would happen. And I think at that moment, I might have gained a little bit of more respect from all of them, especially the chieftain, who I was later to learn was called Captain Wildcat. He was a tall brave, very authoritative, you could tell, amongst the others. And as our journey continued, the Indians began to relax a little bit more. They started laughing more. They started picking at my boys and playing with them and being more human instead of the heathen that we had thought they were. The journey got tougher, of course. We just kept going. We came across one of the largest bodies of water I've ever seen. And of course, Georgie had to ask, is this the ocean that Granny always talked about? Of course, bless his little heart, he did not know his Granny was not coming back. But it was a large river, and we would be following that. We followed that for many a day, until many a day turned into weeks, and the weeks, and before we knew it, a month had passed. To help me out with the babe, one of the braves made this strange contraption with a wooden bottom lined with fur that I could carry upon me back. If I hadn't been so distraught over everything that had happened, I would have thought how ingenious that invention was. For it freed up my hands and allowed me to be with my boys and carry the babe back there, and it just rocked her to sleep. She was a good baby too. And as we kept on with our journey, one day the braves started painting their faces again, and I just knew that it had to be they were doing another raid of some sort. But as we got closer, you could see the smoke through the trees. It wasn't settlers, but more Indians. They had their own camps, and it was a family. They seemed to be friendly, but I assumed that the braves had to put on a show, that they were coming back with a lot of things. And as we went up further, the family followed us, and more families and more families and more families, till we came to an extremely large village. And you know, in my imagination, I'm thinking they're wild heathens living among trees and in caves, but these were homes. They were strange-looking homes. They weren't anything like the cabins that I had been used to. They had bark and all types of things, and they were shaped quite oddly, but it was amazing how many people there was. And as we sat in the canoes, the braves, of course, they got out. And my boys then started crying again because there were so many people. And as we walked out, they would hit you, spit upon you, slap you around. All these women and children, too. And they were half naked. So when we got to the center of what they would call their town or village, there was other white prisoners. We weren't the only ones, because it was myself and Betty and my two boys and Henry Leonard. And when we got there, there was others. And they were all tethered to poles. And of course, that's what we were going to be. Nooses around our neck and tethered to poles. And as we sat there, of course, I got to thinking of what my da used to say. And I was not going to let him see me cry. I was not going to let him see my boys be that way. So as I stood up, I made my boys stop crying. And I told Tommy, I said, you better get Georgie under control. And of course he did. And as I stood up, the baby was crying. Betty, of course, got her to hush. And I don't know if that there was something else that caused a little bit more respect from the natives or not, but they stopped hitting on us and being mean. And there was this one lady at the next pole, massive woman. When she stood up, she was taller than any man I'd ever seen, quite broad-shouldered. And when she was saying, "Gut," I didn't quite understand her words. It was a different language. But she thought that what I was doing was the right thing, and she stood along with me. At that particular moment, all the natives gathered round. They made a big column with an open center, and there was columns on both sides. The chieftains walked up to through the middle. And at this point, I didn't know what it was called then. I've learned since then, it's called the gauntlet. And running the gauntlet was something that you had to do in order to become part of the tribe. One of the first men that they picked was Mr. Leonard. They stripped him down. They stripped him down and made him run. And he fell. And as soon as he fell, they descended upon him as if bees upon honey. He got up and he was led back to the pole. And it was motioned that he should do it again. And he did. And he fell again. Mr. Leonard was not a young man. But when they brought him back that third time, I could see the anger in his eyes, and he was bound and determined he was going to make it. And he did. He stumbled a little, but he made it. They took different ones. They took a soldier that had a red coat on. He, of course, decided that he wanted to fight instead, so he was beaten senseless and dragged back. There was a young lady, couldn't have been more than 16, 17 years old. She had to run next. And she was crying, so they made my sister-in-law Betty run. And I was hoping that they wouldn't, because I was worrying about her arm. Her arm was not actually healing the way I wanted it to. But she made it. She made it all the way down the line to the big lodge at the end. And when they brought her back, the other young lady was supposed to go, but she cried and she begged and she kneeled upon her knees. And of course, the women and children just descended upon her because the men were taken out for the ladies. They were not in part of the gauntlet at that point. And they beat her to the point where she was senseless too. I figured I was next. But then Chief Captain Wildcat, the chieftain, he came up and was, of course, talking and was making motions with his hands like the birth of a baby. And I assumed that he was telling him that I had already been through my ordeal, that I was strong, that I did not need to prove myself anymore. So I was spared. I was spared that ordeal. And looking back upon it now, it makes me think that running that gauntlet, when they stripped him down, it's almost as if you're being reborn into their tribe, showing that you're worthy enough to be part of their association. So, as we did that, things seemed to settle down. Of course, we did find out later that the young lady that was beaten did not survive. And the big woman that I could not understand, when they stripped her down, she looked like an old mule that had lost a lot of weight. Like I said, she was so big, but she made it. And in fact, towards the end of the gauntlet, she grabbed a pole out of one of the ladies' hands, one of the squaws' hands, and started beating her way down through. Made most of them laugh. It was strange to hear their laughter, but they looked upon her that way. There was 2 Frenchmen in the camp, 2 Frenchmen that were traders with the Indians. They had kind of like a trading post. One of them could speak a little English, and he was explaining things to me a little bit. And I asked him, I said, I know that they brought my sewing kit from my cabin, and I'd like to have it so that I could repair the children's clothes, because we had been walking and everything in the same thing for over a month. So they brought it to me. And as I sewed and repaired everyone's clothing, they were watching me. And that is when they got the idea that they wanted to go into business with myself. And I'm like, not thinking about business, but they said, we have a lot of nice cloth. The natives love shirts made out of this cloth. If you can make enough shirts, we can trade, and we'll give you something for it. Well, of course, they wanted me to make 20 shirts for them before they'd give me anything. No, I wasn't going to sew 20 shirts for that. A blanket? But then he said, it's going to get cold up here in the wintertime. It's not like where you came from. So I got to thinking about it, and we bartered back and forth until I got them down to 6 shirts. If I made 6 shirts for them, they would give me 1 blanket. And that was our deal. So I started going to work. And the first shirt that was made, the native that got it traded a silver bracelet. He was absolutely ecstatic, put that shirt up on a pole and paraded it all through the village. You would have thought that he had had a big prize. And each time I made a shirt for one of them, they did the same thing. Until one day, Captain Wildcat came to me. He wanted a shirt. Now, a gentleman that was in our meadow settlement was General Patton. General Patton had been killed during the raid. He was a big Scotsman that had a large claymore. And of course, I think he beheaded several braves before he was taken down himself. But his claymore was one of the prizes that they took when they left our Draper's Meadows. And that is what he traded for his shirt, was that large claymore. A lot of the other things that were traded for these shirts I recognized from my own home. But I tried to put that out of my mind, knowing that we needed the blankets and everything with the coming winter. Time passed. It was strange. It just seemed like it stood still. I knew that the weather was getting cooler, and especially some of the nights were getting cooler. Betty had been a little sullen for a while after running the gauntlet. I think she didn't think it was fair that I didn't have to. But she soon loosened back up and was becoming her old self again. And as time went on, we thought everything was fine, but more white prisoners were being brought in every day. Until one day we were all gathered. I had had Captain Wildcat, when he came to pick up his shirt, also make me an offer. And it wasn't for making more shirts. But he said White Mother was good, and that White Mother had good blood, and my sons had good blood, and that I should come live with him. I think that was more of an offer of marriage, but I was already married to William. I had no intention of becoming another man's wife or property in any way. So the day that they had the gathering in that really large lodge that was so huge, seemed like the entire tribe was there. We were brought all in the middle. The soldier that had decided to fight instead of run the gauntlet was taken, and his face was painted black. There was another man that hadn't run the gauntlet but pleaded for his life. He was also taken, and his face was painted black. I could only surmise that black was not a good color. Then they started taking some of the other captives, and it was like they were giving them away. It almost felt like a slave auction that I'd witnessed before. We were all being parted out. And as they were dwindling down, I thought surely they would allow me to keep my boys and my daughter. But Captain Wildcat stepped up, and he took both my boys by their hand. And then the Frenchman said, "You come with us." That was one of the most devastating things since the raid that happened to me. I was so hysterical at that point that I believe I passed out. And when I awoke, my boys were gone. I knew that Captain Wildcat's village was further north. That was another reason I didn't want to go with him, because it would just take me further north and further away from home, because I still fully intended on going back to William. Betty was taken away, so I just had myself and my babe at that point. The Frenchmen, being in commerce the way they were, had decided that they wanted to go on a salt boiling expedition. The tall German woman, who I later learned was Gretel, was also given to the Frenchmen. They said she could do the work of 2 men, and that she did. I also learned from her broken English that she had been a baker. She had owned a bakery. She loved pastries. She loved to cook. And so Gretel and I were taken even further down the river. We went to this place that was very strange. These large bones of creatures I had never seen before. They were sticking up out of the water, and we were told that we could even sit upon them. Some of the bones were so large they were like a chair. And we were put to work every single day, boiling salt, and if you've ever done that, that's a hot, dirty job. My baby, of course, she was a good baby, but the hard work and the malnutrition that I was experiencing, I was getting to the point where I could not provide for her. One of the French trappers' wives had had a baby, and she had lost it. Her name was Otter Girl. She was a kindly young squaw, about 18 perhaps, and she took a liking to my baby and was watching her during the day, and of course became very close. It almost appalled me to see her feeding my child with herself, but I knew that the baby needed more than I could give it. So as we worked and as the days grew cooler and cooler, I knew that I had to go ahead and make my decision to go home. I knew it was going to be a long journey. I had had a rope belt on at the time, and I had tied a knot in each day that we were on our way here, and it took almost 40 knots before we reached that Indian town. So I knew it was going to take me that long to get home. So at that point, I decided we're going to have to go. And I talked to Gretel, and I told her that we needed to go, and we needed to go by the dark of the moon. We needed to go and pretend like nothing had happened so they wouldn't get suspicious, because I know that if you tried to escape, because another woman tried to do it, if you tried to escape and you're caught, you're made an example of. And part of you might be put here and the other part of you might be put there. So it's a pretty gruesome sight. So the idea was we could not get caught, not at all. So Gretel, of course, no, she was comfortable, she was warm, she was being fed, she didn't want to go. And I told her that was fine. And then as time went on, she was starting to change her mind, because she didn't like the hard work they were putting us through, the way we were being treated. So she said, okay, we'll go. But what about the baby? I had not thought of that. I had not thought of taking a baby upon the trail without means or food or anything of that sort. What would I do? And of course, if she started to cry, she would give us away. So just as if I had lost my boys, I had to make that hard decision, because I was going for William and I was going to bring him back, and we were going to get everyone home. That was what was in my mind. I could envision myself going back to the cabin, which I knew was already gone, up in flames, but just having that vision in my mind helped So as we prepared to go, we hid some blankets and an axe underneath some brush, and they would let us go. I mean, what would two older white women or two women do out in the forest? There was no place to go, nowhere to run. So we had a little bit of freedom. And every night when we were done with boiling salt during the day, they would let us go forage for nuts and fruit and different things to add to the meal. So it was that we took advantage of. Oh, we're going to go and look for wild grapes. There was a lot of wild grapes around. And that's what we did. I said goodbye to the baby as best I could without giving it away. And we started walking. It was getting a little dusky. But we knew if we went in the direction of the river, so we had to double around and make our way. I knew if I followed the river, I'd follow it home. So we walked and walked and walked until we could not see our hands in front of our faces. At one point, we heard gunshots and shouts. They were looking for us. They were shooting off their guns, hoping that if we were lost, which is what we were hoping they were thinking, that they were trying to draw us back to camp. Of course, we ignored that and kept going. We spent a nice cool night with nothing. But we thought for sure we had gotten away, and we had. We just did not think of the journey that was ahead of us. That I try not to think about. But we walked and we walked and we talked. She was getting better we were getting better at understanding each other. Our feet, of course, were sore, and we walked for days. At first, it was not bad. You could find some wild grapes. There's pawpaws around, a few walnuts that the squirrels had not got. But it was the nights that were starting to get colder. We had our blankets, and we slept back to back, so it was always fairly nice. But you see, I could not swim, and neither could she. So when we came to a creek of any sort that we could not cross, we had to walk upstream until we found a place to cross. Then we would cross, but then we had to walk back downstream to the main river, because that was the only map I had. So it was days of that turned into weeks, and as the winter was approaching and the weather was getting cooler, we were getting a little on edge. She was getting on my nerves, let me tell you. She loved to talk about pastries. She loved to talk about her baking. And when you're starving, looking for every meal under any rock practically, you don't want to hear that. But Gretel was keeping me company. I needed that. We needed the distraction, of course. And there was a lot of wild animals, so we knew that that one little axe that we had was not going to last much longer, or not protect us very well. But as we walked and as the days grew, she got to the point where she started blaming me. And she's like, if it wasn't for you, I would not be out here. I'd be back there, I'd be comfortable, I'd be warm, I'd have something in my belly. So that's when I think she decided that I might be a tasty morsel. As large as that woman was, I was at least 20 years younger and a little bit more spry. The first time she tried that, I got away pretty well. We didn't talk for quite a few days, and of course she was sorry about that. We did find some corn in a field where we filled our skirts full of corn, carried that for days. That satisfied her for a while. We would find things, we'd eat things that kind of looked familiar, and of course didn't agree with us later on. But when you're starving, you're going to do whatever you can. Take your chances is what you do. And then it got to the point where she was just so hungry that I was afraid if she tried it again, which she did, that I would not have the strength to fight her off and get away. So that night after she calmed down, I decided to take a log and float across the river to the other side, which I did. Of course, she was surprised the next morning when I was gone, and she saw me on the other side, and of course, Mary, come back. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. But I did not want to trust her a third time. And I told her, just keep following the river, love. We'll get there. We'll get home. And I talked to her. We talked to each other across the river. And the terrain, of course, was changing quite a bit. As you get down near the mountains, the cliffs were getting higher, and it was getting rocky. And of course, I had no shoes left at that point and very little clothing. And the weather was getting cold. We had lost our blankets along the way and the hatchet. It was the beginning of December when I finally crawled into an area that looked very familiar. Mr. Harmon was a neighbor of ours not far from Draper's meadows that we knew. He had a cabin on the edge where he used it for hunting, and I knew I was close. I was to the point where I didn't hardly have much strength left. I had no clothes left but the rope around my waist. And it was spitting snow. But I had come this far and I was not giving up. There was no way. Even if I had to drag my bloody self through there, through rocks and whatever, I was going to make it home. Luckily, Mr. Harmon had stayed a little longer than his sons at the cabin, and he was there. He heard my cries, but when he found me, I must have looked a horrible sight. You know, I used to have beautiful long red hair. But by the end of that journey, it was solid white. I didn't have much teeth left because we used that on trying to crack open nuts and things at times. And of course, I was skin and bones. I was nothing like the last time he saw me. But his wife came down. She had the good sense to feed me a little bit at a time until I regained my strength in a few days, enough to travel into the fort. Most of the settlements were no longer out away from the fort, but they decided to be there for protection. And I was hoping that William would be there too, but he was out. He and my brother had continued trying to find us. They were negotiating with the Cherokee, who is also kind of related to the Shawnee, and trying to get us back. And at the time he wasn't there, so it was a few more days that I got to rest up before I saw my husband again. It was a very tearful reunion. More tearful so when I told him about our boys being taken and our baby girl left behind. He did not blame me. I was very grateful for that. I told him that we would get them back. And that was what I was determined to do. We were at the fort. His brother and his wife were there. And I got that feeling again. A foreboding feeling of something's not quite right. And William listened to me this time. He listened to me, and we moved on a little further away from that fort. And not long after, it was attacked. His brother fought quite bravely. He is just as big as my husband, William, who is a very broad-shouldered man. But unfortunately, he died later of his wounds. His wife and child were also killed in the attack. And Gretel, I was wondering if Gretel would make it. She fared better than I did. She actually came across a cabin that had the remains of a meal that was not more than a few days old. So she rested in the cabin and she ate the meal, and she even found some buckskins to put on. So when she was brought to the fort, we were able to be reunited before she wanted to go back to Pennsylvania, where she was captured from. To this day, I often wonder whatever happened to old Gretel and if she got her pastries again. But as I see, you are already just about to go on your journey some more, and I have kept you long enough with my stories. But I'll tell you one thing. At 17 years old, our Tommy was returned to us. 7 years after the massacre, Betty was returned to us. But our little Georgie died in captivity. And I do not know what happened to my daughter. I like to think that after the war between the British and the French and the Indians was over, that the Frenchman took his wife and my daughter up into Canada, where she is a beautiful little redhead speaking French. But I'll never know. She'll live in my memory and in my heart, just like the others we lost. But I will let you get on your journey, and I thank you for stopping by Ingalls Ferry. And God bless you, and if you're ever back this way again, stop in and see me. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mary and Joyce. Does anybody have any questions for Mary or Joyce? Well, folks, yes.
Yes, she had 3 more daughters and 1 more son after she returned. Her son, John, she named him after her brother, she went to live with him in her older age after William passed away. And it was John's son who wrote an account of his grandmother's ordeal, because it was a story that she had always told. And Mary herself was illiterate. She could not read or write. So her grandson wrote the account shortly after she passed away. And William lived to be 53. He served in the Revolution alongside John and Tommy. Tommy, like I said, was returned when he was 17 years old. He didn't really like civilization that much. He would always disappear for long periods of time and with his bow and arrow. But he eventually became educated. He knew Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, James Madison. He also was a scout during the Revolutionary War. And he later married and had a wife and 3 children. When the same exact thing, 20 years after his ordeal as a child with his mother, the same thing happened to his wife and children. He was in the field harvesting when they attacked his cabin and burned it. They killed his 2 oldest children, and his wife was carrying the baby. She was tomahawked in the head, and she fell over the child. So the child survived without harm. His wife survived too. They removed several bone fragments from her skull, and she later on had several more children. So the descendants of Mary Ingalls are still in Radford, Virginia, in the Blacksburg area. I had the opportunity to go down there a couple of years ago. I've seen her gravestone, and I met some of her descendants. And actually, one day I was doing this program several years ago, and in the audience, somebody raised their hand and they said, "I would like to introduce myself as your great-great-great-granddaughter."
Well, thank you so very much, Joyce and Mary. Folks, don't forget, we're going to have the cabin open up for you so you can take a look and see what it's like in there. Don't forget, maybe your last chance in a couple weeks to see the Gary Simondinger display. And have a happy Thanksgiving, and see you next month.